Hi guys, I'm going to quickly demonstrate the scatter script here. This script is designed to randomly place objects throughout your scene. It can also create random rotation and scaling effects. So this would be useful for randomly placing trees or plants throughout your scene, and it will randomize the rotation and scale as well, so it will add variety to your plants and trees throughout the scene. Now I'm just going to demonstrate on a cube here. You can use any objects you want, instances or regular objects. In this case, I'm going to create a bunch of instances. I'll create 20 instances of this cube here, add it to the scene. So now I have my 20 instances. I'll select the first instance, hold down Shift and select the last one. Now I have all of the instances selected. This script will work on whatever you have selected, so make sure that you have all of the objects selected that you want to scatter. And the script is called up from the command line. I've already got it typed in here. The first number that you feed into the script determines whether you want it to affect the position, the rotation, or the scale. If you have it set to 0, it will randomly scatter the position of the objects. If you have it set to 1, it will randomly scatter the rotation of the objects. And if you have it set to 2, it will randomly scatter the scaling of the objects. So I'll demonstrate each one. First I'm going to demonstrate the position scattering. So I have it set to 0, so it's going to affect the position. Now the first two numbers after that are for the x-axis. So I have it set to -3 as a minimum and 3 as a maximum. So it will scatter the objects between -3 and +3 in the x-axis. I have the y-axis minimum and maximum set to 0. So it will keep all of the objects at 0, which is at the ground level. And these two numbers that you're feeding in are for the z-axis, the minimum and maximum numbers. So I have those set to -3 and 3 as well. So basically we have a 6 by 6 area in space here where it's going to randomly place these objects, and it will keep them all on the ground level because I have the y-axis zeroed out. The last number determines whether you want uniformity or not, and you can use it with positioning or rotation, but it's really more useful for scaling. So I'll save that for when I get to the scaling. So I'll just go ahead and execute the script, and you can see it randomly scattered all those objects within the parameters that we defined. You can execute it as many times as you want until you get something that you like. And if I click on just the regular cube here, you can see that it's scattered them here. You might get some overlapping, so you might have to go in and move one or two around here or there. And now I'll show the rotation. So I'll reselect all of the instances again. I'm going to set that first value to 1 now. So now it's going to scatter the rotation. I'll set the first number to 0 and the second number to 360. This is going to, now that I have it set to rotation, instead of X, Y, and Z, it's going to be heading, pitch, bank. So the first two numbers here are the minimum and maximum values of rotation that you want in the heading. The second two are the minimum, maximum in pitch, and the third two are minimum and maximum in the bank. And I'm going to zero out the pitch and bank so that it only rotates in the heading, which would probably be more consistent with what you would want if you were placing trees or plants throughout your scene. Now I'm going to go ahead and execute this, and if I select the regular cube, the original cube here, we can see that all of the instances now have random rotations to them. You can set these to whatever degrees you want. You can have 0 to 180 degrees or negative 180 to 180, which would be the same as a full 360. But you can set these to 0 to 45 degrees, or if you want to keep it within a certain range, you can do that. Now I'll demonstrate the scaling. I'm going to set the first number to 2 now, so that it will affect the scaling. And again, this will be the X minimum and maximum, Y minimum maximum, and Z minimum maximum. It's going to go back to that, except for it's going to affect the scaling now. So I'm going to set this to the X scaling, the minimum to 1 and the maximum to 1.5. So it will scale the object between 1 and 1.5 in the X. And I'm going to do the same thing for the Y and Z. So now it will scale between 1 and 1.5 in all 3 axes. The reason I'm using the value 1 is because when you create instances, when you go to the Setup tab, the scaling, I have this cube scaled down. So when you create the instances, you go back to the Setup tab, it actually resets the values back to the standard values, which would be, the scale would all be set to 1. So this is going to be, the smallest these cubes are going to be are the size that they are right now. The largest that they're going to be is half as big as they are right now. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to execute the script here, and you can see that we got all kinds of different scaling effects. Some are taller and thinner, some are longer and wider. I have uniformity is set to 0 here. I remember I talked about this last number being the uniform. Uniformity is set to 0, so it randomly generates values for each axis independently. If you want the object to scale uniformly, you just change this last number to 1. And now when I select all of I accidentally had the cube selected there. So now when I select all of these instances and I execute it, I'm going to shrink this back down to shrink that master one back down. But you can see now it kept the uniformity in the scaling. It remains a perfect cube, but it still randomizes each object, the scale of each object. So I think that about wraps it up. You can, like I say, this should be useful to randomly place plants and trees and rotate them and scale them. Oh yeah, one last thing I want to mention here is, if you notice, I have the pivot or axis for the cube at the bottom of the cube. You can see it's rotating around the bottom. The reason that is useful is when you do the scaling effect, it will keep the objects pinned to wherever you have them in the y-axis. So if you had the pivot in the center of the cube and you did a scaling effect like this, when it scaled them, some of these cubes would be floating in midair, some of them would be on the ground or near the ground, and you probably wouldn't want that with plants and trees and stuff. So if you have the axis at the bottom, it will keep all of the objects pinned to the ground when you perform the scaling effect. I think that about covers it. I hope you find it useful.